Actually, it didn't begin in Washington. It started at Cumberland, Maryland. The reason was the Potomac River and a long parallel canal provided a way to get by boat from Washington to Cumberland, 100 or so miles away. By the way, that canal, the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal, is still preserved by the National Park Service. The path where mules once trod, towing the boats, is now a very long hiking trail. And there is one wonderful remnant of that canal, a mile-long tunnel through the Appalachian Mountains called the Paw Paw Tunnel. It's a long, dank tube that you can walk through. I did once. The trip seemed like an eternity. If ever there were a place where you could see the light at the end of the tunnel, but couldn't get there as quickly as you wanted to, it's the Paw Paw Tunnel. But at the end of the canal at Cumberland, the trek westward, the great migration of people and goods went by wagon and horseback over a system of old animal traces, military roads, and Indian trails. The ability of wagon masters to move west was determined by one overriding consideration: the weather. Congress was convinced that the only way the nation could expand was with the creation of a reliable, nearly all-weather road to the west. The National Road was the result. It was initially planned to go from Cumberland through Columbus, Ohio, and a new planned city called Indianapolis, and finally to get as far west as Vandalia, Illinois. Eventually, it would be extended to St. Louis. Along that route to Vandalia into the west lay a sleepy Ohio settlement called Vandalia. Many present-day citizens of Vandalia, Ohio, which is a bedroom community to Dayton, owe their roots to the shenanigans of some wagon masters. You see, some people who paid to be taken to Vandalia, Illinois, were let off in Vandalia, Ohio, far shy of their destination. "Well, we thought you meant Vandalia, Ohio," the scrupulous wagon masters would tell their passengers as they dumped their goods on the ground and left. Not all wagon masters took advantage of westward seekers of the new frontier. Many made it to Vandalia, Illinois, later to St. Louis, and many of them to California. Along the new National Road, a new American culture sprang up nearly overnight. Inns and taverns were constructed for the public. One classic example is the still-preserved inn on the National Road in Grantsville, Maryland, the Castleman Inn, right beside the Castleman River. It's now run by a modern-day Mennonite family. It has great accommodations and some of the best food on the East Coast. Nearby is a lesson in American road building. In microcosm. Just east are 3 parallel crossings of the Castleman River. The first is the old Castleman Bridge. It was built on the National Road in 1813. It's a stone arch with a span of 80 feet. That's small by modern standards, but for decades it was the largest unsupported stone arch in North America, and it was used for vehicle traffic until 1930. At that time, a conventional steel truss bridge was built just to the south for US 40. Farther to the south are the twin concrete spans of the Interstate that now carries most of the traffic through the area. Move west and you get to Brownsville, Pennsylvania, the site of one of the earliest steel bridges in the country, built to carry traffic for the National Road. It's still used for a downtown city street. At Wheeling, West Virginia, engineers spanned the Ohio River with one of the nation's most beautiful and earliest suspension bridges. It was the first to span the Ohio River. It carried highway traffic until the 1960s. It still stands today, and it's on the National Registry of Historic Structures. You know, the National Road may have been first, and in the minds of many historians, it is remembered as the granddaddy of all interstate highways, but there is another road that has captured the imaginations of many, and that is Route 66. 66 is an interesting highway. Over the years, it's carried fewer people than the National Road, but because it's fabled in song and story, there is a romance to it. Route 66 has become synonymous with the American highway. But unlike the old National Road, in many places you can't find Old 66 anymore. Engineers in the 1950s and 60s, rather than building a new interstate parallel to 66, simply paved over the 2 lanes of the old bidirectional highway, turning that right-of-way into one side of the interstate. Another set of lanes would be added to one side or the other of Old 66, forming a 4-lane road with a median. In doing that, the road builders not only obscured most of Old 66's pavement, they changed the landscape. They made it impossible to recapture the flavor of what travel was at one time. Additionally, when they made the road limited access to meet interstate standards, they forced the closing and the abandonment of thousands of classic motels, gas stations, restaurants, tourist traps that were part and parcel of the Route 66 experience. Driving the old 2-lane, the road that some people call America's Main Street, has such an allure that thousands of people come from foreign countries every year. Many ship their classic cars to America, so they can say they drove on Route 66. There are annual events, car meetings, caravans, and festivals. Though much of its right-of-way is favorable to many, hard to find for others, much of it runs alongside an earlier railroad. I'm going to start that page again, if you don't mind, for the recording. Through much of its right-of-way, old US 66 runs alongside an earlier railroad right-of-way. Now, that is not uncommon. The next time you follow an old 2-lane road, it's likely you'll see a railroad on one side or the other. Just look at the right-of-way of Highway 99 through the valley. Highway planners and engineers owe a huge debt to the men who designed the railroads, for it's far more difficult to plan the route for a railroad because the track cannot vary very much in elevation. Highways can have steeper hills. By the way, there is a city along Old 66 that became a favorite stop for motorists. It was built around an old railroading camp. It seems that when the railroad was being built through the area in 1876, engineers found a natural spring beside a huge stand of ponderosa pine trees. To mark the establishment of the camp and commemorate the 100th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, they cut the limbs off a huge pine and stripped away the bark. At the top, they placed a huge stars and stripes. When they sent handbills back east seeking workers on the railroad, they wrote, quote, "Our camp is easy to find. Just look for Old Glory flying in the breeze." Before the next flyer went out, a huge storm ripped up the stars and stripes. The next handbill simply said, "Our national emblem may be gone, but you can still see the flag staff." The lesson in all of this is that there are many things we take for granted in this country, and one of the most taken for granted and most used is our system of highways. Now it is possible to go from coast to coast in just a few days. We can vacation affordably in parts of the nation we could never get to before. Driving on all-weather roadways that are well-marked and for the most part well-maintained is now a fact of life. But do me a favor. Get off the interstate someday and get onto the nation's earlier grid of roadways. From there, go on to city streets and county roads that were once the nation's highways. Stop in her small towns. Buy fresh produce at her roadside markets. Have a burger and fries, an honest-to-God thick shake at a mom-and-pop diner with no name. Along the way, talk to historians and old-timers, former truck drivers, bus drivers, and locals who remember a slower time. Do some research. Buy articulate maps that show the old roads. Find the original bridges, the long-abandoned gas stations, the decaying motels. But be prepared for what you will find, for the ghosts of the American highway are there. The wagoneers, pioneers, innkeepers, and engineers who drove the roads through the wilderness, their ghosts are there. They peer at us through the windows of still-preserved homes along the way, from former toll booths on the National Road, from 100 abandoned tourist traps on Route 66. They stare at us from the endless abandoned bridges across the waters of the Florida Keys on Highway 1, and from the bricks and stones of crumpled inns. They stare at us from the granite faces of hillsides cut down to make way for the expanding highway system. They are there. The ghosts of the roads are on the switchbacks of Highway 40 in the Rockies, on ice-covered 2-lane roads in the snows of New Hampshire, in the gullies and ravines, the abutments and culverts, the endless miles of median, and in the very paint stripe in our headlights. They wink at us in the traffic lights and reflectors of our journey. They are the ghosts of another time, another era, another generation. when getting from here to there was not as simple as today, when travel was a trek and not a treat, a time when you had to want to get there, when freedom, a new life, and the spirit of a dynamic people carved out the dirt, then wooden plank, then gravel, then brick, then asphalt and concrete roads that would bind a windswept new nation together and keep her moving and free. Thank you very much.